They thought she was just a nobody with an old rifle. When Margaret Colburn walked through the polished glass doors of the Sterling Ridge Shooting Club, the air itself seemed to pause, as if trying to make sense of her presence. She wasn't supposed to belong there, not with her frayed canvas jacket, worn jeans, and a rifle so old its wood looked like it had stories of its own. The doorman hesitated before even opening the second set of doors. His eyes darted from her boots mud-caked from the roadside parking lotto, the leather sling of her Winchester Model 70, the kind of firearm you'd expect to see mounted over a fireplace. Not cradled in the hands of a competitor, he opened the door anyway, without a word. Inside, the lobby was marble and mahogany. Polished trophies, lined glass cases, and digital nameplates cycled through the faces of legacy members' heirs to shipping fortunes, tech billionaires' sons, and daughters of senators. Sterling Ridge wasn't just a shooting club, it was a monument to pedigree. Margaret didn't flinch. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate, the tap of her boots echoing far too loudly in the pristine hall. Heads turned. Conversations paused just long enough for people to exchange confused glances before the murmurs started. "She must be lost," one man whispered to his wife. "Did she just walk in with that antique?" chuckled a young man in a designer tactical vest. At the registration table, a blonde woman with a flawless blowout and cold blue eyes handed Maggie a clipboard without making eye contact. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're competing?" she asked, trying to keep the surprise out of her voice. She failed. Maggie gave a polite nod and filled out the form. Name: Margaret Colburn. Origin: Dry Creek, Alabama. Weapon: Winchester Model 70 1964 vintage. The woman's lips twitched. "Charming," she muttered under her breath. Behind Maggie, a pair of men barely in their 20s exchanged grins. "She brought a museum piece," one of them said, a little too loud. Maggie didn't react. That was the thing about years of living in a small town, fixing fences before dawn and hunting in the bitter wind. You learn to let silence speak for you. She walked toward the prep area, boots leaving faint traces of mud along the tile. No one stopped her, but everyone watched. The qualification round was set for 50 Yardstone shots at 10 still targets. Simple for most, trivial for some, and laughable for the elite kids raised with private lessons and $10,000 rifles. One by one, the competitors stepped up. Griffin Harlow, the reigning favorite, breezed through his round with all 10 shots placed dead center. The crowd clapped, some even cheered. Then came her name. There was a delay, like people were waiting to see if it was a joke. Maggie Colburn, lane 6. She stepped forward. There was no applause, only the sound of a few suppressed chuckles and someone muttering, "Good luck, Grandma." Maggie adjusted the strap on her rifle and knelt down calmly. She didn't look at the crowd, the cameras, or even the snickering boy with mirrored sunglasses leaning on the side rail. She just breathed. And fired. 1, 2, 3. By the 5th shot, the whispering stopped. By the 8th, the crowd had grown silent. Each round hit the target clensome, not dead center, but close enough that the range officer's eyebrows rose a fraction. When she finished, Maggie stood, slung her rifle back across her shoulder, and walked off the line without a word. No applause. Not yet. That afternoon, Maggie sat alone at the far end of the clubhouse, with a battered thermos of coffee, her name still fresh on everyone's lips but never spoken aloud. She was the elephant in a room of silk ties and manicured hands. At the center of the lounge, laughter bubbled from a circle of young elites. Champagne flowed. Someone imitated a country accent, pretending to shoot cans off a log. Another joked about charity invitations and Grandma's last hurrah. She didn't rise. She didn't speak. Then, Griffin Harlow approached, his walk casual, confident, but his smile was sharp. "Well," he said, "I'll give you credit. You surprised some folks." Maggie looked up from her coffee. "Did I surprise you?" He tilted his head. "Not really. I've seen this before. Someone has one good round and thinks they're Annie Oakley." She waited. Griffin's friends laughed. "Hey, maybe you'll win a ribbon for Best Antique." Maggie stood slowly. Not defensive, just stunned. "Careful," she said quietly. "Old things have a habit of lasting longer than the shiny ones." The laughter dimmed. Griffin's smirk faltered just slightly. And Maggie walked away. Tomorrow, the rounds would get harder. Rain was forecast, The terrain would shift. It wouldn't be just about accuracy, it would be about speed, endurance, and tactical precision. She knew they didn't want her there. She knew the game wasn't fair. But Maggie Colburn hadn't come all this way to ask for fairness. She came to win. The next morning, the sky broke open. What had been a soft drizzle during breakfast had turned into a steady, soaking rain by the time Maggie stepped onto the outdoor course. Clouds hung low like bruises, and thunder grumbled in the distance. Most competitors grumbled, louder complaining about their scopes fogging up, their boots getting ruined in the mud, their expensive gear being unfit for these primitive conditions. But Maggie said nothing. She tightened the strap of her rifle, wiped a bead of water from her brow with the cuff of her sleeve, and stepped up to the staging area. The day's event would separate those who liked to look tactical from those who were tactical. There were 3 parts: rapid fire, moving targets, and a tactical obstacle course designed to test everything from accuracy to adaptability. The range officer, a retired Marine named Hector Briggs, barked the instructions like he'd done it 100 times, but even he looked skeptically toward Maggie as he scanned the lineup. Targets will move. You won't have time to second guess. No pauses, no excuses. If your boots get stuck, don't whine, just shoot. Maggie gave him a nod. One by one, the shooters went. Some of the top competitors stumbled literally. Polished leather soles were no match for mud. A few cursed under their breath as their bullets missed by inches, slipping in rhythm with their footing. Even Griffin, ever composed, lost his temper after a wild ricochet during his 3rd attempt. Then came her turn. Maggie Colburn, Briggs called out, his voice echoing through the storm. A few heads turned not to laugh this time, but to watch. Maggie stepped forward with quiet confidence. Rain slicked her hair under the brim of her cap. Her hands were steady, her breath slow. She adjusted her stance like she'd done it 1,000 times before, and maybe she had, but never in front of a crowd like this. The buzzer sounded. The first target zipped left. Crack. Hit. The second darted sharply to the right. Crack. Hit. By the 5th shot, there was a shift. Not in the air, not in the rain, but in the crowd. People leaned forward. Conversations stopped. Some even forgot to check their watches. Because Maggie wasn't just shooting. She was reading the field-anticipating movement by milliseconds, leading her shots not with guesswork but with instinct, with experience. It was like watching an old dog outfox, a room full of pedigrees trained only on paper. 10 shots, 10 hits. She lowered her rifle. No celebration, no nod of satisfaction. She just stepped off the line, leaving behind a silence so thick even the rain felt muted. Someone clapped. One single, sharp clap from somewhere near the back. It didn't last long, but it was enough. The second trial began shortly after. A simulated urban course had been built at the far end of the ground steel drums, barricades, alleyways, rusted-out cars. Competitors had to run it, shoot 10 hidden targets, and finish under pressure. Griffin went first. He moved like a predator's lick, fast, controlled, 9 hits, 2 minutes and 8 seconds. The crowd applauded hard. When Maggie's name was called, someone scoffed. Well, now we'll see what the cowgirl does in a real course. She didn't respond. The course was soaked through. Her boots had no special traction, no reinforced soles, just years of wear and grit. Every step was a risk. But she moved. Not with flair but with purpose, measured, tactical. She ducked under a broken pipe, pivoted around a steel drum, fired at 2 quick targets, both fell. She slid in the mud, caught herself with one hand, came up firing. Hit! Hit! Time dragged like syrup, but Maggie didn't rush. She flowed. When she crossed the finish line, her hair plastered to her cheeks and her jacket soaked through, Briggs checked the scoreboard. Colburnton hits. Time, 2 minutes, 15 seconds. She wasn't faster than Griffin, but she was perfect. The clubhouse that evening was different. It wasn't just laughter anymore. It was calculation, whispers, unease. People still glanced at Maggie, but now it wasn't in amusement. It was in suspicion, in curiosity. At a nearby table, Griffin sat with his usual entourage, his jaw set, stirring a drink he didn't sip. Then, someone approached her. She didn't recognize the girl tall, lean, with piercing eyes and a silver locket around her neck. The girl didn't ask to sit, she just did. "You're better than you look," she said plainly. Maggie glanced up from her coffee. "I get that a lot." "Name's Celeste Kane. the girl said, offering no smile. "My father chairs half the board here. I figured you ought to know they're not going to let you win." Maggie met her gaze evenly. "I didn't come here expecting let." Celeste's lips quirked almost a smirk. "Good, because tomorrow's final challenge? They change it every year, and they make sure it favors their own." "What kind of challenge?" "The kind that makes you wish you'd stayed home," Celeste said, standing. "They won't announce the rules until morning. Keeps it messy." As she walked away, her words hung in the air like fog. Maggie returned to her small room, the one assigned to non-preferred competitors. She didn't mind. The bed creaked, the heater whined, and the lamp flickered when the rain hit just right. But she had her rifle, and that was enough. She disassembled it with practiced ease, cleaned every inch, every groove. The wood was still damp, the metal cool in her hands. As she worked, her mind rewound through the day's shots every breath, every pull of the trigger, every time she defied the odds. She didn't know what the next challenge would be. But she did know this. They could change the rules. They could rig the system. They could whisper threats and throw obstacles in her path. But they couldn't stop her from showing up. And tomorrow, she would show up ready, not just to survive, but to finish what she started. At sunrise, everything changed. No announcements, no emails, no explanations. Maggie knew something was wrong the moment she stepped onto the field. The usual course had vanished overnight, replaced by a sprawling, chaotic stretch of land riddled with debris, overturned vehicles, broken walls, half-buried targets, and shallow ditches half filled with rainwater. The final challenge wasn't timed. It was head-to-head. 2 shooters, 1 course, 15 minutes, as many targets as they could find and hit. No resets, no do-overs. And Maggie knew without being told who she'd be facing. Margaret Colburn versus Griffin Harlow boomed the voice of Victor Shaw, head instructor and gatekeeper of the old ways. A ripple of excitement rolled through the spectators like a wave of charged electricity. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Not a fair fight. A spectacle. Griffin stood at the opposite edge of the field, adjusting the strap of his state-of-the-art rifle with a casual smirk. His gear gleamed, spotless despite the storm. The confidence in his stance wasn't just his, it belonged to the system backing him. He raised 2 fingers toward her in a lazy mock salute. Maggie didn't respond. She simply checked her rifle one last time, the wood still slightly damp from yesterday's rain, the metal freshly oiled from hours of careful care. This wasn't about precision anymore, it was about dominance. And Maggie didn't flinch. The starting horn blared. Griffin exploded forward, making a beeline for high ground. Maggie moved at a diagonal, slow and deliberate, eyes scanning the terrain for targets. Her strategy was different, not to chase speed but to control the field. The first target popped up near a rusted truck. She dropped to one knee. Crack. Hit. Griffin's shot echoed a moment later, another hit on the far side of the course. Rain still drizzled from the sky, coating everything in a slick film. The mud was thicker than ever. Maggie slipped behind a broken wall just as Griffin's next shot tore through the air, missing her shoulder by inches. Not deliberate. Probably. Still, it was a warning. This wasn't just about hitting steel plates anymore. This was personal. Minute after minute passed. Target after target appeared, sometimes for seconds, sometimes for mere blinks. Griffin moved fast, clearing ground with brute athleticism. But with speed came mistakes. Maggie heard a muffled curse from the opposite end after a miss. She smiled faintly, because while he chased points with aggression, she played a different game. Patience. Discipline. Trust in the shot. She moved from cover to cover, breathing slow and low. Her boots sank in muck, but her stance never wavered. The only sound was the rain, her breath, and the steady, sharp rhythm of her rifle. Then it came. The final target. A small steel disc, barely the size of a tea saucer, swinging in the wind between a pile of debris. It appeared dead center equidistant from both shooters. They both saw it at the same time. Griffin pivoted, raising his rifle with fluid speed. But Maggie moved first. Time slowed. She adjusted for the wind, the sway, the distance, the heartbeat. She fired. The target spun away with a sharp ping. Hit. A split second later, Griffin's shot flew wide, tearing into the mud behind it. The buzzer sounded. 15 minutes. Over. Silence. Not even the rain seemed to touch the field. Griffin stood frozen, mud splattered across his knees, disbelief etched into every line of his face. Victor Shaw stepped forward, clipboard in hand, unreadable as ever. He didn't look at Griffin. He looked at Maggie. "Final score," he said, his voice flat. "Harlow, 9, Colburn, 10. For a breath, no one reacted. And then, it happened. A ripple small, hesitant applause. Then stronger, louder, real. Maggie didn't lift her arms in celebration. She didn't gloat. She simply lowered her rifle and breathed out. She had won. Not just the round, but the room. Griffin approached slowly, his face pale. His uniformance pristine was now streaked with wet dirt. He stopped a few feet from her. For a moment, Maggie thought he'd say something cruel, that he'd accuse her of luck or cheating. But instead, he held out his hand. "Good shooting," he said quietly. "I underestimated you." Maggie looked at his hand and took it, not for approval, but because she had earned it. Back in the clubhouse, the mood had shifted. People who once looked past her now looked at her, some with respect, some with wariness, but none with laughter. Near the bar, Celeste Kane raised her glass from across the room, offering a nod without a word. Griffin sat alone by the fireplace, slowly twisting a silver ring around his finger. Maggie didn't bask in the victory. She found a quiet seat near the window, looking out at the storm beginning to break. And that's when she saw it. A slip of paper tucked under her door. No signature, just 5 words written in hurried, angry scrawl. "Stay in your place. Last chance." She folded it once and tucked it into her jacket pocket. Because, of course, they wouldn't let her win quietly. Sterling Ridge wasn't built for outsiders. It was built to protect the powerful. And now that she had broken through their walls, she knew they'd try to push back harder. But Maggie Colburn didn't scare easily. She didn't come to ask. She came to earn. And tomorrow? She wasn't going to prove herself again. Tomorrow, she was going to change everything. The next morning, the sun rose behind a curtain of silver clouds. Maggie stood at the edge of the field once more, mud still clinging to her boots, her rifle slung steady across her back. But this time, something was different. The crowd was larger. Cameras dotted the perimeter. Judges from the National Marksmanship Federation had arrived, their uniforms stiff and ceremonial. Even members of the Sterling Ridge boardmen who once scoffed at her mere presence stood near the stage, their expressions tight, their hands clasped. Because today's final championship round was public. Televised, documented, unalterable. No secret rule changes, no last-minute sabotage. Just skill. For the first time, Maggie would not be fighting behind closed doors. She'd be competing under a spotlight, and everyone would see. Competitors were introduced one by one over loudspeakers. Griffin Harlow, Celeste Kane, a third Finalistum Trust Fund marksman with a $40,000 rifle. And then, Maggie Colburn. At first, the crowd hesitated. Her name wasn't one they recognized, but that hesitation gave way to something louder applause. Real applause. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Maggie stepped forward. Her canvas jacket was still stained from the previous day. Her rifle was still the same battered Winchester, but she walked with the weight of 100 silent battles on her shoulders, and the crowd felt it. The final course was the most brutal Sterling had ever constructed. Targets varied in range, some as close as 25 yards, others over 400. Some moved, some spun, some appeared for only a second. Platforms shook, wind tunnels shifted the air. There were no second tries. Each competitor would run the course alone. Results would be tallied only after all had finished. Griffin went first. He moved fast, aggressive, confident, polished. His shots were strong, but 2 went wide under pressure. He cursed under his breath, correcting, adjusting. Celeste followed precise, methodical, but on one elevated platform, her footing slipped. It cost her rhythm and 2 more targets. The third finalist cracked under the cameras, nerves frayed, miss after miss. Then came Maggie. She stepped into the silence. The field stretched before her, unforgiving, cold, indifferent. She didn't rush. Her first shot rang out clean and crisp. Target down, then another, and another. Each movement was deliberate. each breath calculated. She moved like someone who'd learned to shoot not in climate-controlled ranges, but in the deep woods of Dry Creek, lining up shots against wind, breath, and silence. She adjusted mid-stride, recalibrating for weather and terrain with instinct, not instruction. When the swinging targets began, Maggie crouched low, waited, watched, fired only when the moment was perfect. Hit. 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 The course unfolded before her like a challenge and she met it head-on. By the final shot, the crowd was breathless. Fencelence. Then the buzzer. Maggie lowered her rifle. Her heartbeat thudded against her ribs, not from nerves, but from the weight of knowing. She had done everything she could. Now, it was time to wait. Victor Shaw took the stage, clipboard in hand, face like stone. In third place, he began, his voice clipped. Celeste Kane, 92 points. Polite applause. In second place, Griffin Harlow, 96 points. Murmurs, a few surprised gasps. And in first place, Shaw paused, eyes scanning the audience like he could delay the inevitable. With a perfect score of 100 out of 100, Margaret Colburn. For a moment, no one moved. Then came the eruption. Applause thundered, cheers broke out, reporters surged forward. Maggie stood still, face calm, shoulders steady. She hadn't just won. She had done something they couldn't ignore. She had redefined what belonging meant. After the ceremony, Griffin found her by the edge of the range. His hands were deep in his jacket pockets, and for once, his gaze wasn't cocky, was clear. "You deserved it," he said, voice low. "Every point." Maggie studied him a moment. "No hard feelings?" she asked. Griffin gave a short breath of a laugh. "Only toward myself. I was wrong about you, about a lot of things." Maggie didn't smile. Not yet. Instead, she extended her hand again, steady, respectful. And this time, when he took it, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about something harder to earn. Trust. Weeks later, Maggie's name appeared in articles and interviews. She was invited to elite competitions. Sponsors offered her deals gear, endorsements, travel packages. She politely declined most of them. Instead, she went home. Back to Dry Creek. Back to the small range behind her barn. The dirt was uneven, the targets were rusted, the wind was wild. But it was real. Sometimes Griffin showed upless, polished, more humble. Sometimes Celeste came too challenging her to trick shots and laughing when she missed. But often, Maggie was alone, rifle in hand, eyes on the horizon, because victory wasn't the goal. It never had been. One evening, a young girl from town, barely 11, came up to her after practice. "Miss Maggie," she asked wide-eyed, "is it true you beat all those rich people in their fancy club?" Maggie smiled, just a little. "I didn't beat them," she said. "I just didn't let them stop me." Some victories shout, hers whispered. And sometimes, that's louder. Greatness doesn't wear designer gear. It wears grit, silence, and the scars of being underestimated. Maggie didn't walk in to impress anyone. She walked in to remind them what skill really looks like. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove them wrong? Tell us your story in the comments. Who should we feature next?